Welcome to the Authentic Man podcast. I am your host, David Chambers. This is a podcast for men who want more and less from life. More deep connection, more emotional intelligence, more self-awareness, and more great sex. And less heartache, less conflict, less overthinking, and less stress. Creating dating lives, sex lives, and relationships that are incredible and authentic. My deepest goal is that you, the listener, can take away what you hear in this podcast and apply it to your life so that you can experience greater happiness, transformational growth, deeper relationships, and profound sexual intimacy. I believe that as men, we are capable of so much more depth than we are shown or led to believe. So join me as we get deep into this. Welcome back to another episode of the Authentic Man podcast. I'm your host, David Chambers. And this episode is absolutely jam-packed with wisdom. Simon, he has a wonderful way of words. He's a wonderful coach. And really get into the nuts and bolts of identity, what makes up identity, how we even have to self-assess ourselves, how does our ego get formed, That's a really big part of the conversation. How does our ego get formed? The different parts on which we can receive information, the different brains we have within our bodies, not just a brain that sits in our heads. We talk a lot about our inner voices and how we can cultivate a kinder relationship to our inner self and our inner critic as well as the role that fear plays in developing our identity. And also we talk a lot about very existential this episode. If you like to think big about yourself, this is an episode you're going to really enjoy. We talk a lot about how the world influences our own sense of self and our own identity, and how we actually gain an identity before we even exist and decide what our identity is. So some really big questions, a really amazing conversation. I really love this episode, really do. I think it's a really, really deep, meaningful episode for everybody. And I say particularly for men, because there's some real conversations, particularly around men and men's identities and the identity that the world puts on us and how we can kind of work with that. But juicy stuff, really juicy stuff. But before we get into the episode, I'm going to tell you about some up and coming workshops, because, you want to know about workshops. I have the Tantra for Solo that I run with Orsa. That's coming up on the 16th of February. It's always a beautiful workshop. People come, they feel really connected to themselves, and they leave with some really actionable exercises that they can do to become more present, more peaceful, more inner peace, and also, more peaceful and more pleasure during sex as well. We have the Guide to Tantric Foreplay. This really is going to change the way you look at foreplay. Basically, it's a really beautiful guide. We have some wonderful feedback from the last time we ran this. So again, I highly recommend that. That's on the 20th of February. And I've got a new workshop that I'm running about masculinity. It's called Masculinity Redefined. That's on the 23rd of February. And this is something I've been writing for a little while. I've been procrastinating, I procrastinate too on getting this one out, but it's an amazing workshop. It's going to be a really powerful workshop. It's going to be exercises, there's going to be embodiment, there's going to be things you can take away. And we're going to really look at what masculinity is. Like, is the traditional masculinity we've been sold and been told we must be, is it right? Is it useful? We're going to look into some of the things around alpha males, like what's the validity of that? How do you be an alpha? That sort of thing. But as well as we're going to talk about relationships and love, dating and sex, and everything that encompasses being a man, basically, or what version of man you want to be. There's going to be a lot of conversation about that as well. And the last workshop I have coming up, that's going to be in March on the 20th. That's the Tantra for Couples. Again, it's a beautiful workshop for couples. You come, you spend all your time together. There's exercises for you to do together. There's exercise you can take out of the workshop into your own coupled lives, to do in the bedroom, to do in the day, to bring you more connected and peaceful together. Because I speak to a lot of couples and they say the one thing they struggle with is being present with each other, like really deeply being present during lovemaking, but during the day as well. And we give you a load of exercises there that you can feel deeply connected and present with your partner. So That's enough of what I've got coming up. I'm going to let you get into the episode because you're going to really enjoy this one. And like I said, when you really enjoy it, let me know. Tell me what you think. Let me know on Instagram. You can find me at @theauthenticman_. Share the episode with a friend, or especially someone who is thinking these big questions and they're trying to find some direction in life. I think it'd be a perfect episode for someone like that. So without further ado, I'll let you jump into the episode. So welcome listeners to another wonderful episode. And I say they're always wonderful because they are wonderful. Episode of Authentic Man podcast. Today I have a wonderful guest, a man who I came across on Instagram and followed and really connected with his wonderful walks in the forest, of him talking and dispensing wisdom. And when we had a chat one day, we talked about the work that he does, and it really jumped out at me something quite different in coaching. Often coaches are, for the most part, there's probably more business coaches than there are any other form of coaches. But we don't always coaches don't always focus on the self as like actually as a kind of, this is what I'm about. So I was really deeply interested in the work that he does around identity, and we've had a few conversations about that, and I thought it'd be wonderful to bring him onto the podcast. Today I have with me Simon Brett.
Hey David, it's really wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful to see you again. How are you today?
I'm doing well, It's got that end of the year kind of like real thankful for so much that's been going on. Um, Exhausted in the literal sense of the word being a dad, but at the same time, like, yeah, full of gratitude, very happy to be here.
Because you had a little boy come into your life this year.
2021 was a big year for many reasons, but yeah, it was the birth of my son in April. So um, having to surrender lots and having to be compassionate to my ego, and actually just, this is why I'm really looking forward to this session today, because it's showing aspects of who you are, what is your authentic self, and what does that really mean. And not only am I very passionate about that as a human being and as a coach, but man, we've all lived through it. We're all going through it. So it's I'm just really I'm really, really happy to be talking about subjects that is very close to my heart. So thank you very much.
So, thank you for being here. And a question I ask all my guests, I think it's a beautiful way to always start, is what was your journey to do the work that you do today as a identity life coach?
Yeah, journey. I mean, my interest is always my interest now is what it's always been, and that is to speak my truth. And that's what I try and adhere to. Um, it was never easy. I was always someone who was fascinated with big questions, not necessarily questions I had the answers to, but questions I could entertain. And when I look at the kind of trajectory of my life, I realize that there have been several phases to it, whether in my childhood, I had a lot of trauma in my childhood in all sorts of ways. And during my adolescence, that continued. But I also found moments of joy and peace and expression and creativity. And I started to write invariably, and that took me to writing on a much bigger scale. I was very blessed to do that in London, and I wrote plays, which really focused a lot about the human experience, the human condition, what it means to love, what it means to be displaced, what it means to be Black, what it means to be a man. Not by like, this is an exam question and I need to get the answer to this. This is just like flowing, just having a moment to be and to reflect and to assess. And then I realized actually I wanted to ask those questions to men and women who, in this moment in time, we live such a furious pace. And that's perpetuated by so many things going on, the appeal of technology. Um, and I realized actually, how are we, what do we do about what is identity? And I say, well, actually, it's such a big word. I think when you mention identity, it's kind of an overwhelming word. It's almost a word where we just go, I think I know what that means. I've heard, and interestingly, the word identity. When I used to think of identity, and I think for many people, it's almost like in a cold sense, like the police have found the identity of the suspect. You know,
Mm.
it's always like it's a colder feeling, and I wanted to start there and think actually what's so important about meeting with our truest selves, especially in an age where actually it's very hard to just stop and take a moment. And I was asking questions: is identity something you create? Is it something that's predetermined? Um, how is it defined? Is it defined by wealth? Is it defined by currency? Is it defined by associations with family? Is it defined by interests? Is it defined by race? Is it defined by sexuality? And I realized that for many people, looking into these things can be a real source of inspiration, but it can also be a real source of anxiety because it asks you to go deeper into the person of who you are. Um, and why is that so important? And I decided I was so passionate about it is because I lived a life according to what other people wanted to see in me. So I wasn't effectively being my truest self. I didn't know it at the time. I thought it was just in doing mode and trying to get by from one moment to the next. And then I realized actually I've had to perform, not in the grandiose way of performing, but I've had to kind of show aspects of being performative to get to where I am today. And what if I ask myself, what if I could just be me and just surrender to that? Would I still get the things I wanted? Would I still be the person? Would I still have the same dreams? And so, my role as an identity life coach um, is to help my clients navigate um, how it is to surrender to the inner self and why that is so important. You know, we have like I listened to this amazing podcast, and it was with the physician, Dr. Gabor Mate, and he said something really amazing. He said, "We have three brains. We have the brain in our head, which we as human beings rationalize, but we also have the heart brain, and we have the gut brain. And most of the things that we do in our life, the decisions that we make with the prefrontal cortex, which is like the really, frontal navigational part of our brain, that's governed by the head brain, the rational. Our decision making isn't necessarily picked up by the heart brain or the gut brain. And yet, our heart and our gut brain is really what our truest form of self is trying to tell us, but we've somehow tried to sort of keep that repressed. So I think it's very important to talk about this because um, there's so many distractions, David. You know, we live in a world full of it, whether it's the news, we, you know, I think about I was born 38 years ago. So I lived like the first 23, 24 years of my life without social media. And that kind of later stage, the appeal of technology created identities in men and women that was really interesting. We can have an identity on Facebook, we can have an identity on Twitter, we can have an identity on Instagram, and we could create friends, or we could create people who we think like us, but we don't know if they really like us. And it's just incredible. And I was thinking, well, what is our intention? What are we trying to get out of all of this? Big questions. But I don't. start with those big questions. And I think when it comes to identity, I like to compartmentalize it. It encompasses a lot of things. So, but essentially, it's truth amongst many things. It's truth.
And I want to come back to the something you said about how we form our identities. And it's similar to what you're saying about social media identities and how we can create these identities. But a lot of us aren't consciously creating our identity, and we don't get the opportunity to from a young age because we don't realize that it's something that we can even do. So how does our identity start to get created as we are growing up? What are the influences on our identity?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And they say we start our identity the moment we're born, but actually, our identity, um, interestingly, is already determined for us before we are born.
Mm,
There's a wonderful in the Akala book, Natives, where he's talking about his life in Northwest London. Um, there's a wonderful sentence that really resonates with me right at the beginning, and he says, and I'm paraphrasing here a bit, but he says, um, "I was I was not born with an opinion of the world, but it was apparent that the world had an opinion of me." And so he came into the world knowing that actually he was born in, you know, I was born in the 80s. So I was born in a Thatcherite government. I was born as a black person. I was born as a black person with a white father and a black mother. Um, I was born pretty poor. Um, and these were the kind of factors that you don't you don't have a say. These are just kind of part of who you are. You just grow up knowing that actually, yeah, this is my life. And it's funny because when I was a child, like, I grew up in Northwest London, and my mum's Nigerian. And there was a big there still is a big West African community in Northwest London, Nigerian communities, Ghanaian communities. And I remember as a kid, David, I was one of us, and the first kind of thing I was like, what's this kind of? My mum would nod to like every single like other black person, and I remember as a kid thinking, is this an identity? Like, is this a kind of community thing? And I was just thinking, okay, that's interesting. It's almost like you just have this sense, and as you grow older, you realize that identity becomes it becomes almost a way of um, survival, for another word, trying to hold on to the values of what you think other people would make of you, particularly if as you go through school and you go through college and you go into your 20s. um, I certainly found that about myself. I throughout my teenage years, I didn't see my father for, well, I didn't see my father from the age of 11 till 23. And that had I think retrospectively, I can say it now, it had a huge impact on my life. But at that moment, I was just getting through a moment and a day. And I was raised by my mother, and I lived with my brothers. We didn't have much resources, much money. Um, and I was thinking, actually, I could live the rest of my life not knowing what it is to see my father. There was a point where, when I was 15, I reckoned with myself. I was like, you know what? I've kind of made peace with the fact I may never see my father, which was a very interesting thing in terms of becoming a man. So, in terms of my identity, I really saw masculinity through my mother's eyes. I never saw masculinity through like a man who could show me, um, you know, where to go, um, what were the barometers, what were his ideals, and that was interesting. Um, but I think when I think of identity now, I think it's a question, especially when I ask clients, I ask them, what does it feel like? What is not what you're doing, but because when you ask someone what possibly a natural answer or response to that, it's like, well, I'm a doctor, or that's my identity, I'm an artist, which is relevant, which is absolutely fine. But questions that we don't actually give ourselves the time of day is that, what does it feel like physiologically? Like really what it, and I think when you ask people to hone in on that voice, that inner voice of yours, um, because sometimes I feel like it's so hard for many people to realize that they even have an identity, because they are so disillusioned by so much that's going on in the world. How can anything be uniquely ours? How can anything be rightfully my feeling, my worth, my value, or whatever they want to define as their identity? How do you distract from the noise?
Because like that inner voice we have, it's like sometimes you just can't hear it, right? Like if you've gone through years and like you described, um, like my childhood, sounds in many ways similar to yours. I'm 37 years old, born in the 80s, and you are you grew up with this identity of the things that, like you said, that are put on you, like the resources that you have, like what culture did you grow up into, what was the community around you, and those things place identity on top of you, and you don't even really question it. You just say, oh, that's who I am because that's what the world tells me I am. And then sometimes we don't know what that voice is, because there's one voice we've kind of internalized, is like the voice that we're completely, the many voices that we're being told and being said to us, and there's a point at which we kind of internalize that for ourselves and go, well, this is who I am, and then we act into the world, this is who I am. Like, say for instance, the boy who's been told he should be a doctor, and he grows up to be a doctor. And a big central part of his identity is that he is now a doctor, because he was always told he was going to be a doctor and the meaning of what being a doctor meant. And he never stops to think, did I want to be a doctor? Is this something that felt good for me? Or was it just something that I was told so much that I should be, that I believed that that is the case? And he's almost suppressed that inner voice that could have made a different choice, maybe said that he was an artist or he wanted to be a pilot. And I guess the question that comes to me is, how do we surface that inner voice, that true inner voice that is our own unique inner voice?
Yeah. The question I ask myself, and I write down this, like, it's on the front of my journal, is, can you remember the person who you were before the world told you who you were supposed to be?
Mm.
Can you remember the person who you were before society placed these things on you? And it's such an amazing example with the doctor, because when you're younger, your intuition isn't something that is like a byproduct of your way of navigating. Certainly, when I was younger, I couldn't access my intuition. I lived under rules, and I lived under ideals, and I lived under ways of doing things. And there was this barometer for what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad, how to achieve something, how not to achieve something, what are the right politics, what are the wrong politics. And there were times when I would say to myself, my gut would be like, no, this isn't the way forward. This isn't the way I need to kind of navigate. Just because my mother has this agenda, I don't need to believe this. Um, and so as you grow older, you realize that that doesn't stop talking to you. that thing, that inner self, that intuition. Because I think, and this goes back to accessing of the free brains, the free minds that we have. And I keep on knowing that actually the way I live my life isn't navigated through a rational sense of the world. The way I should live my life is by showing moments of intuition, and stepping into moments which I believe actually what's going on in your heart. So I think this goes down to actually surrender. It goes back to total surrender. It's it's a place of actually understanding that we can stopping, taking a moment and just writing down anything that's coming into our minds right now. What do we need? And how does that feel like? And I think sometimes that could be the hardest thing to ask human beings. I I remember when I would text friends and I would just I'd ask them, how are you? They'd say every other thing besides talking about how they are. So they give me a question, they talk about doing things, they're achieving things, I've got to go here, but they wouldn't have a moment to self assess and really ask, why, I suppose. Is it because there's an identity about ourselves that we have created? And if we show a moment of vulnerability, if we show that we need to struggle, if we show that we need to talk to someone, that will break the mask, the veil of who we are. And I think it's understanding that actually, we don't come into a place knowing that our decisions aren't governed by what we see and what we hear. The appeal of technology is very hard, though, and I think I'm going back to that point because um, it's um, it's really hard. We have huge presences on for people who we admire, and we cultivate an identity. Paradoxically, we're possibly cultivating an identity now to be on this podcast. That's something that we need to be aware of, and that's okay. Um, but it's about human beings have certain needs. Human beings, when we're born in the world, we need to belong. We need to be in contact. We need we need to be seen. We need to be heard. And I think when we grow up with this kind of lack of healthy attachments, then that leads to an unhealthy attachment through external needs, through trying to validate yourself through other forms. And that's where identity becomes blurred. And that's where actually what do I truly want and our intuition becomes blurred, because we're trying to create a way that we're trying to create a life that truly isn't in alignment with our hearts.
And here, when we get that blurred of our identity, it's almost as if we start to lose our identity of who our true self is. The line no longer is like, this is who I am. And we
Mm,
start to pull in the need of these external world to feed who we are and to validate who we are. And we become, instead of being quite a defined line, we become like a mist or like a cloud with other identities. But then we also, in doing that, start to get that external identity we're creating, which isn't in alignment with who we are. We then kind of split off and we create multiple identities, even potentially to, different people in a different world. It's a bit like you talking about Instagram, because we exist on Instagram and we unwittingly build an identity, sometimes consciously, mostly unconsciously, of who we are, what our lives look like, and what we talk about. And then, as he said inside the podcast episode, we create this identity of who we are through the conversation, through how we pause even to those who listen. And if these identities, if we start to trying to project into this identity something that we think other people want from us or want to hear from us, instead of what is true for us in that moment to speak and to say, we start getting into the realm of that we are creating an identity just to be validated by others or to make other people happy.
100%. And but when we go into that um, autopilot mode, we don't have that awareness. We come into it with the intention to gratify, for the intention to use our content, we come in that intention to have maybe a facet of our identity to appease people. So it's interesting, like when we get likes, for example, are they, there could be that niggly feeling. Are they liking me or are they actually liking my content? It's like, what are they liking here? And, you know, the more people like you, the more you need people to like you. The more you need, and it's almost like, well, where does this go with my identity? These are like blurred lines because, this is where it comes into realms of unhealthy attachment. And the bigger question is, what if I were to present Simon unashamedly, wholeheartedly as me? What would that look like? How would that feel like? And can you still have power in that? And because all of this frenzy of, the appeal of technology and what we're trying to create, it's false to a degree, what we're trying to bring out to ourselves. And yes, it shows an aspect of who we are, but there's still that prevalent that, sometimes you feel that power when you're kind of like speaking to someone who may have 100,000 followers and you don't have those followers. And it's just like, where's this identity? What's going on here? Um, it's a very, and I think for men, I think if we're going into a topic specifically veering towards men, it's a very complex, abstract subject, identity. I feel when society creates false needs and we substitute those needs for real needs, we grow more and more into what other people, as a man myself, especially going into my 20s, I found that actually I could assimilate better with people if I just, you dress, and that's not that's from a non-judgmental point of view. You can take in the same music, you can take in the same things of clothing, you can go to the same clubs, you can like the same girls, you can do these kind of things. But it's about, actually, there's always that time where it's like, well, what's stopping me from being my truest self in these moments? And that's hard. And it's hard. And that's why I say that we live in a moment now that there's distractions, there's moments to just copy, feel infectious. We live in this uniformity of the world where it would be, it's deemed as paradoxically weak to show up as someone. We're still not using Instagram really as a tool to be, just to be, necessarily to do, to the function, to gratify, to project beauty, to project worth, whatever that means. There's still that, we're still a bit unsure about it. I think as much as we tell ourselves when it comes to identity that we've got this figured out, and I think if we kind of just breathed a bit and just allowed ourselves to think, actually, shit, when I'm coming onto Instagram or when I'm about to create a post, oh my God, I've got all of these things. Where's this coming from? Like, who's governing this energy? And I think the more we're conscious of the things that actually govern our energy, the external voices, the more we realize that this is not the way in which we need to be living our lives in the healthiest aspects, in the most healthiest way to do that. So um, yeah, it's hard. You know, I'm always more willing to speak to as a coach. It's not something I ask for male clients to just say, hey, let's talk about identity. And, you know, we've got a 6-day crash course and you're going to get it all figured out, because reckoning with your identity is hard work, and that's okay. But it's also a very beautiful process. And as a father, I've come into moments where my ego wanted to take me places, David. When my son was born in the first 6 weeks, you always have a plan. When he comes into the world, yeah, you know, week 7 will kind of be at this point, and that's when our, you know, human beings always like to rationalize. We always used to have a plan, and actually, you're at that moment where you don't have a plan, and you have a child, and it's the most beautiful, exhilarating, but also the most shocking thing in many ways. And you're just there, and it's just you. And you have to say to your ego that's telling you, you need to work out, man. You're looking in the mirror and saying, you're not eating right, or look at you. And it's just like, that's my top part of my brain saying, if I'm not listening to what my gut's telling me, is to slow down, and actually just ask yourself, what do you need? Do you just need to have a day, have a moment where you can just take away the noise, take away what's been going on in your mind, and just listen to what your heart's telling you? And I've had to do that for months, and I've had to surrender, and I've had to think about, actually, my ego was saying, oh, you're not going to be that same person you was before, Simon. And you're a coach, and you're doing, you've got that creeping up, and you've got to be compassionate to it. You've not got to say, actually, ego, here you are trying to sort of like make me feel bad, because our ego is here to protect us. People think our ego is the problem. Our ego isn't a problem. The way we've got to the world is because our ego has helped us. And that sounds kind of counterintuitive, but it isn't. It's like our ego is designed to keep us safe, and it keeps us not going into moments where we could be in harm's way or at a risk. Now, as you grow older, you realize that your ego still wants to keep you safe, but that safe's kind of boring. That safe's kind of safe. It's kind of like, okay, and then you've got your intuition saying, you could be this. How would that feel? And your ego saying, no, don't do that, Simon. So you kind of got this tussle match. I don't know whether that answers your question, and I know I went a bit off track with that, but I wanted to bring forward, yeah, it's just lots of currents going through my mind right now.
Oh no, they're beautiful. And there's two things you said. The thing you said at the end about the ego and intuition. I'll get back to a second, but you talked about why we don't present our true selves in the world. And this is something through my work of working with men, especially in dating and relationships. There's this real, what I see is this predominant fear, and I see it men, women, but I see is that who we are, that self that we are, isn't good enough in the world. And it's that through that belief, which runs very deep for a lot of us, that we then have to take on other identities, or we tell ourselves that we need to be something different. And in that, I see often is that that action reinforces the idea, the fear that we're not good enough, you know. And I see that as one of the huge reasons why people don't present who they are into the world, for this fear that if who I am, if I show people who I am, that they will reject me, they will ostracize me, and I will be alone and I will be unloved. You know, it's really deep level. It's that way. It might just occur to us as, you know, I go and talk to a woman at the bar and she doesn't want to talk to me. Now afterwards, I feel deflated. But the deeper levels of that, we literally feel like we will be pointed at and laughed at and sent to the corner, to face the corner, you know, whatever version it is for us. And that's something I see so often when it comes to identity. And that ends up governing so much of how we use our energy in the world and so much how we show up. And then we pile on top of that our ego, which is then doing this wonderful job of keeping us safe. So our ego is then saying, no, don't present who you are, because it's not safe to do that. If you do that, you will be in harm's way. So then our ego then reinforces this idea for us that, you know, doing certain things is unsafe because, you know, it still treats us like we're a small child. It's almost like our ego doesn't really get out the idea that we're no longer 11 years old. We're now an adult and we can, you know, handle things to a degree. So we get into these loops of fear and inaction and not listening to our true selves or going after what we want, because underneath it there's various fears and wanting to stay safe. And I guess the question I have is, how do we even identify that we are in that sort of loop? Because often our fear, I feel, is very sneaky. Our fear will kind of dress up as other feelings like boredom, not fancying something. I don't want to do that. That's not for me. But underneath there's a fear or a lack of safety. So how do we kind of identify that we are not progressing forward in our lives due to fear or due to this fear of showing our true selves?
Mm, you sure know how to ask an easy question.
No, just whatever thoughts you have, I'll be all for.
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating question. I think um men like to think if we apply energies into other people before we can apply energies into ourselves, by and large, then actually we're doing our souls the world of good. So if we can, it's almost like we, and I'm not saying this because men are not all one socially constructed identity, you know, and I think this is the fear. I think existentially, we are not all dangerous, you know, we are not all to be feared. We are all not abusers. We are all not financially successful or emotionally stable. And yet, when it comes to the way men have been crafted into the world, especially about the kind of alarmist ways in which men have been portrayed into the world, it can be very hard for a man to actually say, you know what, amid the noise of everything going on in the news and everything perpetuated, because, you know, even though there have been a lot of changes in the conversations around, and this is very much living proof of these conversations, amongst many other things, we are we, there's still this prevalent feeling that men still need to be living through the lens of masculine norms,
Mm.
you know, and there's been a lot of changes, and we're having and and the shifts have been huge, and I'm not sort of reckoning with that. But I think when there's so much going on, I think it's very hard to say, well, it can be so easy to attune your identity to the way that is appeasing your friends, your family, your boss, your girlfriend, because heaven forbid, if there's a moment where I need to reckon with how I really feel, well, I shouldn't just give that the airtime. It's much easier just to sort of like, and that's, and sadly, that's a very, very normal process. That's something that as men, we take on something that's quite funny from someone else. We take on something that's quite witty. We're always kind of like yearning, in a way that, I like what he has. I like what he's wearing. I see what I'm aspiring to this person. And we forget the true essence of what's made us, what's brought us here in this first, all the challenges, all the adversity that men face, everything that we've had to overcome, everything that we're still overcoming, and we're still navigating a world. And we don't have that moment to just be at peace with it and just say, actually, can I take a moment of that inner self and show it out to the world? And the conversation's changing. Um, I think the pandemic has certainly exacerbated that. I think as we come into the end of a second year in a pandemic, I think we're getting men and women, we're getting human beings reckon with what they really want. What do they truly want? The biggest question a human being can actually ask themselves is, what do you want? And for men, that's like, I don't need to be working in my job. I don't need to be in this relationship. I don't, these are things that actually, because if it's taken a place where I can be at home and, and I'm not out with my friends all the time because of the nature of COVID, then actually I'm having moments to actually be with myself. I'm being more and more with myself. And, where it's one of these periods in time where we are now getting and enabling men to really speak their truth, a truth that's possibly been repressed from them for many, many years. And it's like, the time is now, because I'm tired and I'm exhausted, and I'm not here to perform anymore. There was a moment, I say that, as a black man, performing, not in like the theatre performing, but actually being someone to appease someone else and taking on a personality was almost a byproduct of what black men do. And that could be quite unwitting, but it's almost like, because we need to feel like there's that level of, I'm working hard and I need to show it. And it's almost like I'm not, it's almost like there's, you can be at peace with yourself, but I'm also doing it for other people. And that's exhausting. And yeah, I mean, I mean, it's a lot to talk about, but I think when I deal with men, I deal with it piece by piece. It's about asking, how do I feel? What do I want? What do I need? And I just think it's just questions that if you ask yourself every day, um, it's one of the questions I love to just generate more is into their identity. It's just waking up and saying, what do I need right now? And how do I feel? And let that be the platform for actually allowing you to cultivate a kinder relationship to your inner self.
And I hear that those questions are really powerful, and it's really jumped into my mind is how, even in my work with men around dating and relationships, a conversation I've had a lot this year with men is, so what do you want from a relationship? And
Mm,
that question has been really interesting because we often imagine that if you said to someone, "Oh, what do you want in a relationship?" someone could probably give you an answer in a few minutes. I've had 2 hour conversations where at the end of the conversation, the man I'm speaking to is like, I've got no real idea. Because when you start digging into what do you want in a thing, and this I think ties into identity, is that we start to realize that we don't know what we want, but we know what we've been told that we should want, right? Or
yeah.
we've been told what we should feel. All these things we've been constantly told from the outside. So, it's just about life. We take it from a point of view of men. It's like, oh, what do you want? You want to have a good job, a nice house, a nice car, a couple of holidays a year, promotions, a nice relationship, blah, blah, blah. And this is
Mm,
kind of where we see this midlife crisis thing. And I feel like I'm seeing this more. I don't think it's necessarily a crisis because it is kind of a bit of an existential crisis, I think, that often happens. I don't think it just happens to men. But what happens is that they reach all the levels. It's like you've played the video game and you've completed the video game, and you thought, when I complete the video game, I'm going to be really happy. And then they complete the video game and they realize, oh, this is just it. I'm just here and I'll be doing more of this. And at that moment, there's this like, oh shit. So I don't feel happy. I don't feel any better than I did when I was like 10 rungs down the ladder. Then there comes that question of like, okay, I thought I wanted this stuff and I have all this stuff. So what's now? What now do I want? I have no idea, but I know that I want something that's not what I have now. And that is the point of where I think it almost is a blessing to so many people to kind of have this quote unquote midlife crisis, because it then peels some layers back for them to look at and go, actually, what do I actually want? What do I want to feel on a day to day basis?
yeah, yeah. I deeply resonate with that. Um, it doesn't come easy. It doesn't, and that's okay. It's like sometimes in the relationship, case in point, we go into what almost the external influence tell us we need, and we run with those needs. And we may have that need, and it may fulfill us for a few months, maybe a year. And part of the journey, as you really well put, is actually that you realize that I had to go through this in order to find out actually what is it I truly need, I truly want. And that is still an incredible thing. If you enable yourself to go through that cycle and still have the awareness, that's a beautiful thing. I think what makes things, those kind of fine lines between reality and what's been kind of perpetuated through lots of things, media, people. I think it's when we take this full sense of reality and we normalize it and we crystallize it and we say, I daren't touch what my intuition's telling me because I'm just living a world that's appeasing to what society wants of me. So yeah, I totally hear what you're saying on that.
And it becomes a lesson in kind of learning to tune into your own intuition. And
Mm,
I feel personally really lucky because I did stumbled across a load of work a number of years ago around this singular principle of the power of intuition, the power of being able to quiet the mind and come into this inner knowing. And you mentioned it before, there's so many distractions. You would almost feel like our whole world is built to prevent us from ever spending enough time to stop and really be listening, especially in our kind of Western world. I think when you start going into the less developed world, you see that their lives are naturally more peaceful, more quiet, more kind of reflective, more around being in peace with other people. But the way in which we have created technology, the pace of everything speeds up. we have more distractions. We have phones, we have computers, we have jobs, we have second jobs. We don't have time to really either stop and for 5, 10, 20 minutes a day and just be with ourselves or truly be with other people. But in fact, the real power in stopping and tuning into intuition is allows us to, and I use a word you used a couple of times, is to surrender to that voice and allow ourselves to be guided to what we desire, what we want, even if when we start to hear that voice, it makes us shit ourselves because we feel really scared because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't have to follow this linear pattern or work to the plan that we've been told. And I think that's a moment that often we come to, or if we're lucky we get to, that we like, there's these things that I really deeply desire, deep love, family maybe, or even just to make a difference in the world, a real positive impact. And we go, how do I listen to this? Because this now goes against much of what I've been told, but also I'm now really scared because it doesn't really make sense to me in this brain. It doesn't make sense from that part. But, to tie into what you said earlier, it's like at that point we are connecting to our heart brain and our gut brain, which is guiding us towards what we deeply desire and want.
Yeah, there's a saying in coaching, and it's saying that we need to slow down to speed up. And it's moments like this where it can be so easy to rationalize outcomes through our kind of our brain, as it were. And there are moments where we think as human beings that we have all the tools to change our experience and we can just change it and if I just think like this or I get to this point or just one more step and I'm there, when actually, and there's a moment where it becomes, well, in order to change we must surrender. So we go against the very thing that our brain, I suppose, our kind of prefrontal cortex is kind of saying, this is what you need to do. And that could be quite the paradox for a lot of human beings. But I think as long as we're human and as long as we're in this human condition, there is always going to be anger, anxiety, fear, joy, happiness, anywhere we go in all of our whole life. So if we can understand that, regardless of, if we are continuing to be in doing mode, I say doing mode versus being mode. Doing mode is one more step, doing tasks. And if we accept that actually this is going to be part of us, then there's a moment where we just we need to ease into that life of total surrender. We need to understand that feelings will come, moments of these will arise, and it will always happen. It is invariably the way the human condition is. But there comes that point, doesn't it, where we have to just look into ourselves and tap into, what if? I know I can do this, and I know the rational part of my brain says this, but is that my truth? And it goes back to what I said in the beginning, like about identity, and for want of, for many ways, it's truth. And I can't tell you what to do. Only you know that. I can't advise you to make a decision. And when a client says, Simon, where do you expect me to go? Like, what decision? Can you just give me your opinion? And I said, well, what's feeling inside of you right now? And he said, and the feeling's telling me, and I was like, well, hold on to that. What does that mean? What does that say in the body? Write about it, express about it. And so I'm going back to your point. We live in a world where there is so much. We live in a world that's almost saying, actually, to slow down is to not keep up with, to not keep up, and to not keep up is to be to not know, and to not know is to be weak. There's a kind of that kind of pattern that kind of makes us descend into this, oh shit, I'm going down this rabbit hole. But what's perpetuating that? If we understand where that voice is coming from, who energizes this voice? Where is this coming from? This is fear. This could be something that's just kind of like trying to keep you safe. And this is a time where actually it's really important in these moments where we let go of all of that. We let go of all of the feelings about what can be and what we need to do, and we tap into what is true. And, you know, identity is never finite. It's never something we just know. It continues to develop in our lifespan. Continues to develop moment by moment. Something will happen in our hearts, in our gut, that will tell us what you need to do. And it will be different in every given moment. So when I ask people, let's talk, let's get your, I never, it's not a case of getting your identity nailed down in these steps and that's it, you cracked it, over and done with. We don't need to do anymore. This is a life's work, and it's a beautiful life's work. Yeah.
It's the life's work of learning about yourself, learning about who you are, what you desire, what you want, and even why those desires exist or why you had other desires before. And this, all through this work of learning, allows us to then, we learn about ourselves, our internal, but then it allows us to then express that into the world around us.
I like that. That's really well. That's really well put. Again, I keep on saying, hone into who you were before society told you what you wanted. I love to talk. I love to create. I love to draw. I I love to sing. You know, there were moments where I'm in my 30s now, and I was like, I used to have quite a good voice. Like when I was about 9, or then I was in 14, and then like in my teenage years, and then you just learn to sort of like give into that thing that was once a really joyful part and an authentic part of who you are. Like I used to paint, I used to write, I used to run, I used to do things like, and you turn into a person that is more affiliated with how you need to navigate the world. And that's perpetuated through a lens of getting through, doing, doing, doing. And so I ask human beings, I ask men and women to really tap into that thing that excites your soul, that just excites you internally, that makes you feel like, if I brought this out into the world, what if? What would happen? How would people see me? Would I still be the same person? Would I be viewed differently? Does it matter? Yeah.
I like the last thing you said there is, does it matter? Because I think we hold on to so much so tightly, that how people see us, how people view us, that if we were to no longer be that thing, it would be disastrous. People would think all sorts of things. But we often forget that it doesn't really matter.
No, no, it doesn't really matter. And it doesn't really matter at all. And I think if we can emancipate ourselves by breathing into that and actually feeling that we can be what is true in our hearts and what is right and ready, and we can actually amplify this and create this as a persona that is ready through our intuition, in our identity. um, that's how we can live a much more wholehearted life. I truly believe that. It's And I don't come in this perspective as a coach saying, "Hey, I've cracked it," because I haven't. And I think that's sometimes a big, you know, by virtue of me being a coach, by virtue of me being an identity coach, knows that I've reckoned with a lot of trauma in my past, a lot of areas of identity I've had to deal with physical trauma, racial trauma, um, and that's played a big part on who I am as a human being. Like I constantly ask the question, and I still continue to ask the question, what it means to be a man, what it means to be a black man. And I'll continually ask that question, and I'll continue start to ask myself, well, how does that make me the most truest sense of who I am? Um, yeah, it's we need to be more curious. We need to have moments where we can just stop and self-assess in a really healthy, intuitive way and see where that takes us. And then the next day, we're not trying to achieve, it's like I said, it's not something that we should overcomplicate because it's beautiful, It's something that we just go into each and every day, just reminding ourselves, what do we want? What do I need? How do I feel?
Mm. Really important, really important and beautiful questions there. Yeah, I've add that to my daily journal. I feel that's a really beautiful place, great place to end today's conversation, which has been incredibly enjoyable. Thoroughly weaving and dancing through different aspects of being a human being, the identity behind that. So I'm sure the listeners are now wondering where they can listen to more of Simon or talk to him or work with him. How do people find you in the world?
Sure. I love that word, by the way, dance. I think that's what we've been doing. Like it's been for the last hour, we've been dancing. Metaphorically speaking. Uh, but it's been a pleasure. So thank you, David. So you could find me primarily on Instagram. So you can get me at Simon M. Brett Coach. Um, Currently looking for one-to-one clients into the new year. So you can get in touch with me for my email, which is simon@simonbrettcoach.com. Um, so that's the first thing. And I think another thing I really wanted to kind of mention before we go is when it comes to me being an identity coach and working with my clients, a lot of people, and I kind of the defense mechanism is like, I got my identity sorted. I know who I am. I know my worth. It's almost like we don't, it's almost like when clients, they come in the mind, sometimes people could come in the mindset thinking, well, I know myself, so why would I need to? And it's not from the premise of not knowing yourself. It's from the presence. If you know yourself, then let's try and celebrate you and get you to places that you deserve to be and help you reach your potential. So that's, we work in a whole way of doing things. So you can get in touch with me on my Instagram, or you can email me direct. Um, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Simon. Thank you for such a wonderful conversation. Thank you for joining me today.
It's all good, David. It's all love. Thank you.
And listeners, if you've learned anything from this conversation, I'm sure me and Simon would love to hear from you. Drop us a message on Instagram, just to just let us know what it was that you took away from the episode, any learnings, anything that you can take into your life to create the change that you desire. So until next week, thank you for listening, and ciao ciao.